Dr. Kessera touched the smooth crystal surface of her workstation with her thin, delicate fingers. The blue light from the screen reflected off her translucent skin as she studied the data flowing across her display. Around her, the research lab hummed with quiet activity. Scientists from 12 different worlds worked together in the peaceful halls of Harmony Station. The station was the pride of the Galactic Council. It floated in space above the green world of Veltar Prime, where Kessera had been born. Here, the best minds from across the galaxy came together to study life in all its forms. The work was important and safe, just like everything else the Council did. Kessera specialized in studying tiny life forms that could survive in extreme places. These small creatures lived in places that would kill most other life, near stars, in frozen space, or in toxic clouds of gas. She found them fascinating because they were so different from the gentle beings who lived on peaceful worlds like hers. The morning started like any other. Kessera was examining samples from a distant moon when her colleague, Dr. Thane, called out from across the lab. Thane was a tall, bird-like creature from the Aviaran system. His feathers were always perfectly groomed, and he moved with the careful grace of his people. "Kessera, you need to see this," Thane said, his voice filled with worry. "Our deep space sensors are picking up something strange from Quarantine Zone 7. Kessera felt her heart skip a beat. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the quarantine zones. They were areas of space that had been sealed off long ago, before any of the current species had reached the stars. Ancient warnings passed down through generations said these places contained terrible dangers that must never be disturbed. She moved quickly to Thane's station, her crystal-like feet making soft clicking sounds on the metal floor. The data on his screen made her blood run cold. Energy signatures were spiking throughout Zone 7. Patterns that had been dormant for thousands of years were suddenly active again. "Are you sure these readings are correct?" she asked, hoping there had been some mistake. Thane's feathers ruffled with anxiety. "I've checked 3 times. The containment systems around Zone 7 are failing. Something inside is waking up." Kessera activated the emergency protocols. Within minutes, the Council's top scientists and military leaders were connected through secure channels. The main display in the lab showed a map of Quarantine Zone 7 and the surrounding star systems. Red warning lights blinked as automated systems detected the growing threat. Admiral Velsh appeared on the communication screen. He was a Zentorian, with gray skin and large, intelligent eyes. His people were known for their calm thinking and careful planning. But even he looked worried as he studied the data. "How long do we have?" he asked. Kessera ran the calculations again, hoping she was wrong. The numbers were clear and terrifying. 72 hours, Admiral. Maybe less. The containment fields are failing faster than we expected." The room fell silent except for the humming of the station's systems. Everyone understood what this meant. The quarantine zones contained the remains of the Devourers, ancient machines that had consumed everything in their path long ago. The old story said they were like a plague made of metal and energy, eating planets and stars alike until there was nothing left. 3 star systems had been completely destroyed before the Devourers were finally stopped and locked away. The ancestors of the current galactic civilization had built the strongest prisons they could imagine to keep the machines contained. For thousands of years, those prisons had held. Now they were breaking. "What military assets do we have in the area?" Admiral Velsh asked his staff. The answer was not encouraging. The Council's fleets were designed for peacekeeping and exploration. Their ships carried scientists and diplomats, not weapons of war. Even their military vessels were built for precision strikes and careful tactics, not the kind of total destruction that might be needed against the Devourers. Dr. Kessera watched as the Council's emergency session fell into chaos. Representatives from dozens of worlds argued about what to do. Some wanted to evacuate entire star systems. Others suggested trying to reinforce the failing containment fields. A few even proposed using the Council's most powerful weapons to destroy the entire quarantine zone. But everyone knew the truth. The Council had built a peaceful civilization. They had ended wars, hunger, and suffering across hundreds of worlds. They had created a galaxy where different species could work together in harmony. None of that had prepared them for something that simply wanted to destroy everything it touched. As the arguing continued, Kessera made a decision. She activated the deepest emergency protocols, signals that would reach even the most distant and primitive worlds. The distress call would go out on all frequencies. including the old emergency channels that most civilized worlds had stopped monitoring long ago. The message was simple but desperate. Extinction event imminent. All civilized species threatened. Require immediate military assistance. The signal spread out from Harmony Station like ripples in a pond. It reached the core worlds of the Council within hours. It traveled to distant research stations and trading posts on the rim of known space. It even reached places that most Council members had forgotten existed. The dangerous worlds on the edge of the galaxy, where primitive species struggled to survive on hostile planets. On one such world, in a place the galaxy called the Deathworld sector, the signal was received by a species that had only recently made contact with the galactic community. The humans had been quiet neighbors for 50 years, keeping to themselves on their small collection of worlds, around a yellow star they called Saltantont. The Council knew little about humanity, except that they came from a world so dangerous that most other species couldn't survive there for more than a few hours. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, a place where everything from the weather to the smallest creatures could kill visitors from more civilized planets. Most Council members assumed that any species from such a horrible place must be primitive and violent. They were welcomed into the galactic community with polite caution, given basic technology, and then largely ignored. After all, what could a young species from a death world possibly offer to an ancient civilization that had solved all the great problems of existence? Admiral Sarah Chen sat in the command center of the UNS Indomitable, studying the distress signal that had just reached human space. She was a small woman with dark hair and calm eyes, but there was something in her expression that would have surprised any Council observer. She looked at the data about the Devourer threat not with fear, but with the calculating gaze of someone deciding how best to solve a problem. Around her, human officers worked with quiet efficiency. Their uniforms were simple and practical. Their equipment was built for function rather than appearance. Everything about the human ship suggested a people who valued results over ceremony. Chen opened a communication channel to Earth Command. "This is Admiral Chen. We have received a distress call from the Galactic Council. They have an extinction-level threat-breaking containment in Quarantine Zone 7. Council forces are insufficient to handle the situation." The response from Earth was immediate. "Understood, Admiral. You are authorized to respond with all necessary force. The safety of galactic civilization is now a human responsibility." Chen smiled grimly as she began issuing orders. The Council had sent out a call for aid, expecting maybe some medical supplies or evacuation ships. They had no idea what they were about to receive. Across human space, military fleets that the galaxy didn't know existed began powering up their engines and loading their weapons. The humans were coming, and they weren't bringing aid. They were bringing war. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the massive holographic display in the war room of the UNS Indomitable. The three-dimensional map showed the failing quarantine zone in painful detail. Red lines marked where containment fields were breaking down. Yellow dots showed where Devourer machines were already breaking free. At the current rate of expansion, the ancient killing machines would reach populated star systems within days. Commander Torres, her tactical officer, ran simulation after simulation on his workstation. Each one showed the same result. The Council's defensive fleets were simply not equipped for this kind of threat. Their ships were beautiful and efficient, designed for a galaxy that had forgotten what real war looked like. "Look at their fleet compositions," Torres said, pointing to data about Council forces. "Exploration cruisers with light defensive systems, science vessels with no armor. Even their military ships are built for peacekeeping missions against pirates and smugglers, not extinction events." Chen nodded as she studied the information. The Council species fought like they were playing a complex game with rules and protocols. Everything had to be precise and careful. They spent more time discussing tactics than actually fighting. It was an approach that worked well for maintaining peace between civilized worlds, but it would be useless against something that just wanted to consume everything in its path. "The Devourers don't negotiate," Chen said to her staff. "They don't have politics or fear or mercy. They're a machine plague designed for one purpose: to eat everything they encounter and make more of themselves. You can't reason with that. You can't contain it. You can only destroy it completely." She activated the secure communication system that connected her to Earth Command and the scattered human fleets throughout known space. The signal would reach dozens of ships and installations. from the massive orbital shipyards around Earth to the frontier colonies on the edge of human territory. This is Admiral Chen aboard the UNS Indomitable. We have received a Council distress call regarding an extinction event in progress. Ancient Devourer machines are breaking containment in Quarantine Zone 7. Council forces are inadequate to handle the threat. She paused, looking around the room at her officers. These were people who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. Humanity had been preparing for galactic-scale warfare since they first learned they weren't alone in the universe. I'm implementing Protocol 7. All available military assets are to converge on the quarantine zone immediately. This is not a rescue mission. This is not a peacekeeping operation. We are going to war against an extinction threat, and we are going to eliminate it completely. The response was immediate. Across human space, fleets that the galactic community had never seen began moving. The Sol Defense Fleet powered up its newest supercarriers, massive ships that could launch hundreds of fighters and carry enough firepower to sterilize a planet. The Colonial Rapid Response Force abandoned their patrol routes and began forming up for combat operations. The Deep Space Exploration Corps, which the Council thought was just a scientific organization, revealed its true nature. Their ships were heavily armed and built for long-range operations in hostile territory. They had been mapping the galaxy for 50 years, identifying threats and preparing for the day when humanity might need to fight for survival. But Chen knew that ships alone wouldn't be enough against the Devourers. These machines could adapt to energy weapons and learn from every attack. They could turn captured technology against their enemies and use it to build more of themselves. Fighting them would require not just firepower, but the kind of brutal, adaptive warfare that only one species in the galaxy truly understood. She opened a direct channel to General Marcus Rivera, commander of the Terran Expeditionary Corps. Rivera was a big man with scars on his hands and a voice that could cut through battlefield noise. His Marines were trained for the worst possible conditions, fighting in space, on toxic worlds and radiation fields that would kill most other species. General, I need your people ready for ground operations in a contaminated zone, Chen said. We're going up against adaptive machines that learn from every encounter. Your Marines will be going into environments that would kill unprotected humans in seconds, fighting enemies that get smarter with every battle. Rivera's grin was visible even through the communication link. Admiral, my Marines train for that kind of mission every day. We'll be ready. The preparations continued for 18 hours. Human ships converged from across their territory, moving with a coordination and speed that would have impressed any military observer. Each vessel was loaded with weapons that the Council had never seen, plasma cannons that could cut through any known armor, kinetic kill vehicles that struck with the force of small asteroids, and antimatter charges that could crack moons. Dr. Kesara, monitoring the situation from Harmony Station, was the first to detect the approaching human fleet. Her sensors showed massive gravitational distortions. At the edge of the star system, the signature of many large ships dropping out of faster than light. Travel at the same time, Admiral. Welch, she called through the communication system. I'm detecting multiple contacts approaching the quarantine zone. The signatures are unusual. Admiral Welch studied the sensor data with growing confusion. The readings suggested ships much larger than anything in the Council's databases. The energy signatures were completely unknown, showing power levels that seemed impossible for vessels of their apparent size. Could these be Devourer machines? He asked. Kesara checked her instruments again. No, Admiral. These signatures are completely different. They're organized, moving in formation. I think someone responded to our distress call. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation at the edge of the quarantine zone. Admiral Chen's flagship, the UNS Indomitable, led a force of 200 warships. Each vessel was built like a weapon that happened to have crew quarters attached. Their hulls were dark and angular, covered with sensors and weapon systems. Behind the main battle fleet came the support vessels, troop transports, supply ships, mobile repair stations, and massive carrier ships that could launch thousands of fighters. It was a force designed not just to win battles, but to fight a war of extinction against an enemy that would never surrender. Admiral Welch tried to make contact with the unknown fleet. Unidentified vessels, this is Admiral Welch of the Galactic Council Defense Corps. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came immediately, in clear and confident tones. "Admiral Velsh, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Nations of Earth. We received your distress call regarding the Devourer threat. We are here to eliminate that threat completely." Velsh felt his confusion growing. Earth was that primitive world in the Deathworld sector, home to a species that the Council barely acknowledged. How could they possibly have a fleet this size and this advanced? "Admiral Chen, we appreciate your response to our call for aid," he said carefully. "Perhaps we should coordinate our relief efforts with Council Command and—" "Admiral." Chen's voice cut through his words with the kind of authority that came from someone used to making life-and-death decisions. "You sent out a distress call because you're facing extinction. We're here to prevent that extinction. I recommend you withdraw your forces to a safe distance and allow us to work." As if summoned by her words, the quarantine zone's final containment barriers began failing. Ancient Devourer machines poured through the breaches like a tide of living metal, their mechanical screams echoing across space as they tasted freedom for the first time in thousands of years. The Council forces tried to respond with their standard tactics: careful, precise strikes designed to minimize damage and contain the threat. The Devourers adapted to their attacks within minutes, learning and evolving with each failed attempt to stop them. Admiral Chen watched the Council's futile efforts with grim understanding. They were fighting the way civilized people fought, trying to solve the problem with minimal violence and maximum precision. But the Devourers weren't civilized. They were a force of pure destruction that could only be stopped with overwhelming force. "All ships," Chen announced to her fleet. "The enemy has revealed their capabilities. Time to show them what Deathworlders do best. Operation Hellfire is now in effect." The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had been preparing for during 50 years of careful silence. Admiral Velsh stared at his tactical display in growing disbelief. The human fleet that had just arrived at the edge of the quarantine zone was unlike anything in the Council's military databases. Their ships moved with a predatory grace that made his skin crawl, positioning themselves around the failing containment barriers with the precision of hunters surrounding their prey. The lead vessel, the UN's Indomitable, was a kilometer-long monster of dark metal and weapon systems. Its hull was covered with launch bays, sensor arrays, and what looked like enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Behind it, 200 other warships spread across space in formations that spoke of centuries of military evolution. Dr. Kesara watched from Harmony Station as the human fleet deployed. Her scientific mind tried to process what she was seeing, but it didn't match anything she knew about the species from Earth. The Council's files described humans as a primitive people from a dangerous world, barely worthy of notice in galactic politics. These ships suggested something very different. Every line of their construction spoke of a civilization that had spent its entire existence learning to fight and survive. They weren't the vessels of explorers or traders. They were the products of a warrior culture that had turned violence into an art form. "Admiral Chen," Velsh transmitted, trying to keep his voice steady, "we appreciate your response to our distress call, but perhaps we should coordinate our efforts with Council Command before taking any action. The situation is extremely dangerous, and we have protocols for handling threats of this magnitude." Admiral Chen's response came immediately, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made it clear she was used to giving orders in life-and-death situations. "Admiral Velsh, your protocols have failed. Your containment systems are breaking down faster than your forces can repair them. In approximately 6 hours, those machines will break free and begin consuming everything in this star system." The communication channel crackled with tension as Chen continued. "You called for help because you're facing extinction. We're here to prevent that extinction. I strongly recommend you withdraw your forces to a safe distance and let us handle this threat." Velsh looked around his command center at the faces of his staff. They were all looking at him with the same question in their eyes. Who were these humans? And how had they hidden this level of military capability for 50 years? "Admiral Chen, the Council has procedures for joint military operations," he said, falling back on the bureaucratic training that had served him well throughout his career. "We need to establish command structures, coordinate our tactics, and ensure that we're not working at cross purposes." "Admiral," Chen's voice took on an edge that made Velsh's feathers ruffle with instinctive fear. "While you're discussing procedures, those machines are adapting to your weapons and learning to counter your tactics. Every minute we waste talking is a minute they use to become stronger. As if to prove her point, the quarantine zone's alarms began sounding as another containment barrier failed. Ancient devourer machines poured through the breach like a silver tide, their mechanical forms shifting and adapting as they encountered the vacuum of space. They moved with horrible purpose, already beginning to consume the automated defense platforms that had held them for millennia. The Y Council forces attempted their standard response: precision energy barriers to contain the breach and surgical strikes to eliminate the escaped machines. The Devourers studied their attacks for exactly 17 seconds, then adapted their defenses to render the Council weapons useless. Dr. Kessera watched in horror as a full squadron of Council patrol ships was overwhelmed by a swarm of machine parasites that learned to counter their shields and weapons in real time. The elegant vessels designed for peaceful exploration and careful scientific work were torn apart by creatures that had evolved to be perfect killing machines. Council forces are taking heavy casualties, she reported to Admiral Welsh. The Devourers are adapting faster than our computers can calculate new attack patterns. At this rate, we'll lose all our ships within the hour. Welsh looked at his tactical display and made a decision that went against every instinct his peaceful species possessed. Admiral Chen, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. We request that you take command of the joint operation. Admiral Chen's response was immediate. Understood, Admiral. All Council forces are to withdraw to a distance of at least 50,000 kilometers from the quarantine zone. Do not attempt to engage the enemy. Do not attempt to provide fire support. Just get clear and let us work. The human fleet began moving with a coordination that amazed the watching Council observers. Ship after ship slid into attack positions with mathematical precision, their movements suggesting countless hours of practice and preparation. It was like watching a pack of predators that had hunted together for years. Commander Torres, monitoring the tactical situation from the Indomitable's bridge, called out targeting data to the fleet. Primary swarm concentration at Grid 77 Alpha. Secondary breakout at Grid 12 Delta. Containment failure imminent at Grid 44 Charlie. Admiral Chen studied the data for exactly 3 seconds, then gave the order that would redefine the galaxy's understanding of warfare. All ships, Operation Hellfire is now active. Target priority is total elimination of all Devourer forces. Collateral damage to quarantine infrastructure is acceptable. Repeat, we are authorized for maximum force. What happened next burned itself into the memory of every Council observer. The human fleet didn't attempt the careful, precise strikes that galactic military doctrine called for. Instead, they unleashed a storm of destruction that turned entire sections of space into killing fields. Plasma bombardment cruisers opened fire with weapons that created walls of superheated death, vaporizing Devourer swarms by the thousands. The machines tried to adapt to the plasma streams, but the humans simply increased the temperature and intensity until adaptation became impossible. Kinetic kill destroyers launched projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. When these solid metal slugs hit Devourer formations, they created miniature stars that consumed everything within hundreds of kilometers. The machines couldn't adapt to the fundamental forces of physics being weaponized against them. The human ships worked together like parts of a single organism, using tactics that spoke of centuries of warfare against other humans. They created overlapping fields of fire that left no escape routes. They used the Devourer's own adaptability against them by changing attack patterns faster than the machines could learn. Dr. Kessera watched the battle with a mixture of fascination and horror. The humans weren't just fighting the Devourers. They were demonstrating a level of military sophistication that the Council had never imagined possible. These weren't the ships of a primitive species learning to fight. These were the weapons of a civilization that had mastered warfare as completely as the Council had mastered peace. How is this possible? She whispered to her research team. The Council's first contact reports described humanity as a young species with limited technology. Where did they get ships like this? Her colleague, Dr. Thane, studied the sensor readings with his characteristic attention to detail. Kessera, look at the construction patterns on those vessels. The metallurgy, the power systems, the weapons integration. This represents at least 200 years of advanced military development. They didn't build this fleet after making contact with us. They already had it. The implications were staggering. For 50 years, Humanity had been hiding their true military capabilities from the galactic community, while the Council species had spent their time on peaceful pursuits: art, science, philosophy, and diplomacy. The humans had been preparing for war on a scale that no one else had imagined. As the battle continued, Admiral Chen opened a communication channel to the Council observers. "Dr. Kesara, Admiral Velsh, I want you to understand something important. What you're seeing here is humanity fighting at perhaps 20% of our actual military capacity. We are using standard fleet assets for a routine threat elimination operation." The words hit the Council representatives like a physical blow. If this overwhelming display of force was only 20% of human military capability, what were they hiding in the systems around Earth? Admiral Velsh found his voice first. "Admiral Chen, why? Why hide this level of military development from the galactic community?" Chen's response was matter-of-fact, delivered in the same tone she might use to discuss the weather. "Admiral, in the 50 years since first contact, the Council has faced exactly 0 extinction-level threats. You've built a peaceful civilization based on cooperation and mutual understanding. We respect that achievement, but we also prepared for the possibility that something might threaten it." As she spoke, the last major devourer swarm was being systematically eliminated by coordinated human fire. The ancient machines that had once consumed star systems were being reduced to their component atoms by weapons that seemed to violate everything. The Council thought they knew about physics. Someone had to be ready, Chen continued. Someone had to maintain the ability to fight and win against threats that don't respond to diplomacy or reason. We chose to be those guardians. The final containment failure happened at exactly 1427 Galactic Standard Time. 3 massive breaches opened simultaneously, as the ancient barriers that had held the Devourers for millennia finally collapsed under the strain. What poured out was the stuff of nightmares, millions of machine parasites that moved like living mercury, each one designed to consume any matter it encountered and use it to build more of itself. Admiral Velsh watched in horror as his remaining Council ships tried to implement emergency containment protocols. The elegant energy barriers that had worked against pirates and smugglers simply dissolved when the Devourers touched them. The machines learned and adapted faster than Council computers could calculate new defensive frequencies. The USS Harmony, a Council science vessel that had tried to get too close to the action, was overwhelmed in seconds. Dr. Kesara watched from her station as machine parasites flowed over the ship's hull like a silver tide, eating through the metal and converting it into more Devourers. The crew's final transmission was cut short as the machines consumed the communication array. "All Council forces, withdraw immediately." Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "Do not attempt to engage. Do not attempt rescue operations. Clear the combat zone now." Admiral Velsh wanted to argue, wanted to demand that they try to save the trapped crew members, but the tactical display made the situation brutally clear. Every second his ship stayed in the area, more Devourers were learning how to counter Council technology. The machines were adapting not just to weapons, but to the fundamental principles behind Council engineering. The human response was immediate and overwhelming. Admiral Chen's fleet moved into attack formation with mechanical precision, their dark ships spreading across space like predators surrounding prey. But they weren't just positioning for a standard naval engagement. They were preparing for something the galaxy hadn't seen in thousands of years. Total war. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen." Her voice carried across the human fleet. "The enemy has demonstrated their adaptive capabilities. Standard engagement protocols are insufficient. Authorization code Omega 77 is now in effect. We are cleared for maximum force projection." What followed redefined warfare for every observer. The human ships didn't attempt the surgical strikes that galactic military doctrine demanded. Instead, they unleashed weapons that turned physics itself into a killing field. The plasma bombardment cruisers fired first. Their weapons didn't create neat energy beams or precise laser strikes. They projected walls of superheated matter that reached temperatures found in the cores of stars. When the plasma hit the Devourer swarms, it didn't just destroy them. It broke them down to their component atoms and scattered those atoms across space. The machines tried to adapt, building heat-resistant shells and energy-absorbing surfaces. The humans responded by increasing the plasma temperature to levels that made adaptation impossible. They weren't fighting a clever enemy. They were applying the fundamental forces of the universe with brutal efficiency. Commander Torres coordinated the assault from the Indomitable's tactical center. His screen showed targeting data for hundreds of ships, each one adding to a symphony of destruction that grew more devastating by the minute. "Kinetic kill vehicles are away," he reported to Admiral Chen. "Impact in 30 seconds. The kinetic weapons were perhaps the most terrifying part of the human arsenal. They were simply solid chunks of metal accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. When they hit their targets, the kinetic energy was converted to heat and radiation in explosions that created brief, artificial stars. The Devourers had no defense against the fundamental laws of physics. Their adaptive abilities meant nothing when they were being hit by weapons that released more energy than some planets produced in a year. Each kinetic strike created a sphere of destruction hundreds of kilometers across, sterilizing space so completely that even the machine's self-repairing abilities couldn't function. But the space battle was only part of the human response. General Marcus Rivera's Marines were already loading into combat drop pods aboard the troop transports. Their mission was to penetrate the largest Devourer nest and eliminate the core processing units that coordinated the swarm intelligence. "Listen up, Marines," Rivera's voice carried across the transport ships. "We're going into a hot zone filled with adaptive killing machines that learn from every encounter. The environment will be toxic to human life. The radiation levels will cook you without your suits, and the enemy gets smarter every time we fight them." The Marines listening to his briefing were veterans of conflicts that most galactic species couldn't imagine. They had trained on worlds where the atmosphere was poisonous, the gravity could crush most aliens, and the local wildlife evolved specifically to kill anything that moved. They wore powered armor that made them look like walking tanks, and they carried weapons designed not for precision but for maximum lethality. "Our job is simple," Rivera continued. "Get in, find the core processing nodes and destroy them completely. No prisoners, no survivors, no adaptation time for the enemy. We're going to hit them so hard and so fast that they won't have time to learn our tactics." The drop pods launched like bullets from the transport ships, accelerating toward the heart of the largest Devourer nest at speeds that would have killed unprotected humans. Inside each pod, a Marine checked their weapons and prepared for combat in an environment that would be instantly lethal to most Council species. Dr. Kesara monitored the assault from Harmony Station, her scientific instruments tracking the battle on multiple levels. What she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare and survival. The humans weren't just fighting the Devourers, they were demonstrating a level of military evolution that spoke of millions of years of constant conflict. "They're not afraid," she whispered to her research team. "Look at their bio readings. Heart rates are elevated but stable. Stress hormones are within normal combat ranges. They're not terrified, they're excited." The realization hit her like a physical blow. These weren't desperate defenders fighting for survival. These were apex predators doing what they had evolved to do. Humanity had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to kill efficiently, and they were applying those lessons on a galactic scale. General Rivera's Marines hit the Devourer nest like a controlled meteor storm. Their drop pods punched through the machine defenses and deposited armored humans directly into the heart of enemy territory. What followed was a demonstration of ground combat tactics that no Council military observer had ever imagined. The Marines moved through the nest like a plague of destruction, using weapons that created localized antimatter explosions, molecular disruptors that broke chemical bonds at the atomic level, and plasma charges that burned at temperatures that could melt starship hulls. They didn't try to capture territory or hold positions. They simply advanced through the nest, destroying everything they encountered. The Devourers tried to adapt to the human tactics, but the Marines changed their approach faster than the machines could learn. They used different weapons every few minutes, altered their movement patterns constantly, and coordinated their attacks in ways that prevented the swarm intelligence from developing effective counters. "Target acquired," Rivera reported from deep inside the nest. "Primary processing core located. Initiating protocol terminus." The protocol terminus devices were humanity's answer to adaptive enemies. They didn't rely on any single destructive method. Instead, they created cascading failures in space-time itself, unraveling the fundamental forces that held matter together. When they detonated inside the Devourer core, they didn't just destroy the machines. They erased them from existence at the quantum level. Commander Torres watched the nest collapse from the Indomitable's bridge. Primary target eliminated. Secondary processing nodes are going dark across the combat zone. Swarm coordination is breaking down. Admiral Chen allowed herself a small smile as she watched the tide of battle turn decisively in humanity's favor. The Devourers, deprived of their central intelligence, began fighting as individual units instead of a coordinated swarm. Human weapons that had been merely devastating became absolutely lethal as the machines lost their ability to share adaptive information. All ships, commence final sterilization protocols, she ordered. I want every cubic meter of this zone purged clean. Nothing survives. Nothing escapes. Nothing adapts. The human fleet began the methodical process of sterilizing the entire quarantine zone. They used controlled stellar manipulation to create solar flares that washed the area with enough radiation to break down any remaining machine components. They deployed gravitational weapons that crushed space itself, making it impossible for any Devourer remnants to maintain cohesion. Dr. Cassara watched the systematic destruction with a mixture of awe and terror. In less than 6 hours, humanity had accomplished what the Council's best military minds had thought impossible. They hadn't just defeated the Devourers. They had eliminated them so completely that not even their component atoms remained in recognizable form. But more importantly, they had revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. 72 hours after the human fleet had arrived at Quarantine Zone 7, the threat that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia was completely eliminated. Where the Council had expected a costly containment operation lasting months or years, humanity had delivered total annihilation in 3 days. The quarantine zone was now a sterile pocket of space, scrubbed clean by weapons that turned physics itself into a tool of destruction. Admiral Chen's after-action report to the Galactic Council was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to discuss routine fleet exercises, threat neutralized, quarantine zone sterilized, all hostile forces eliminated with 0 survivors. Human casualties, 17 wounded, 0 killed. The numbers didn't make sense to the Council representatives listening to the briefing. They had lost 3 entire defense fleets just trying to slow the Devourer advance. Hundreds of their best ships had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Thousands of crew members were dead or missing. The human fleet had faced the same enemy and taken casualties that barely registered as a rounding error. Dr. Cassara led the Joint Council human debriefing aboard the UNS Indomitable. Walking through the human flagship was like touring a weapon that happened to have living quarters attached. Every surface was designed for maximum efficiency in combat operations. The corridors were wide enough for rapid troop movement. The walls were lined with emergency weapon lockers. Even the crew quarters looked like they could be converted to combat positions at a moment's notice. The human crew moved through their ship with the confident efficiency of people who had trained for their entire lives to fight and survive. They wore simple, practical uniforms without the decorative elements that marked rank in most Council militaries. Their equipment was built for function rather than appearance. Everything about them suggested a civilization that valued results over ceremony. Admiral Chen met with the Council delegation in the ship's primary briefing room. The space was designed like a military command center, with tactical displays covering the walls and communication systems that could coordinate fleet operations across multiple star systems. Even at rest, the room felt like it was ready for war. Admiral Chen, Dr. Cassara began, her voice carefully controlled despite the questions burning in her mind. The Council is grateful for your intervention, but we need to understand what we've witnessed here. How did humanity develop such advanced military capabilities without the knowledge of the galactic community? Chen's smile was neither cruel nor kind, simply factual, like someone explaining an obvious truth to a child. Dr. Cassara, you come from a world where the most dangerous predator is roughly equivalent to what we would consider a small pet. Your people evolved in an environment where cooperation and intelligence were sufficient for survival. She gestured to the tactical display still showing the sterilized quarantine zone. Humanity evolved on Earth, a planet that spent millions of years actively trying to kill us. Our atmosphere was poisonous to most life forms. Our weather systems could destroy cities. Our geology produced disasters that wiped out entire species. Even our smallest microorganisms were deadly to visitors from other worlds. Dr. Cassara nodded slowly. The Council's xenobiology reports had classified Earth as one of the most hostile planets ever discovered. Most species required environmental suits just to survive in Earth's atmosphere for more than a few hours. But the scale of your military preparedness, she continued, your weapons technology, your tactical coordination, your willingness to use such devastating force, this goes far beyond simple planetary defense. Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair, and for a moment, her expression showed something that might have been sadness. Doctor, humanity has been at war for our entire recorded history. We've fought against our environment, against extinction events, against diseases that could wipe out our entire species. When we ran out of natural enemies, we fought against each other. She activated a holographic display that showed the history of human conflict, thousands of wars spanning centuries, weapons that grew more deadly with each generation, tactics that evolved through constant battle against other humans who were equally determined to survive. By the time we reached space, we had accumulated more practical experience with warfare than the rest of the galaxy combined. Every human ship is built assuming it will face something trying to destroy it. Every human soldier trains for scenarios that would give your people nightmares. Every human colony is prepared to defend itself against threats that most species can't even imagine. The implications rippled through the council delegation like a shockwave. For 50 years, they had been treating humanity as a minor rim species, while humanity had been building a military that could conquer the known galaxy. More importantly, humanity had chosen to use that power to protect the galactic community rather than dominate it. Admiral Velsh, who had been quietly listening to the exchange, finally found his voice. Admiral Chen, why? Why hide your true capabilities from us? Why allow the Council to treat you as a junior member of the galactic community when you clearly possess the power to demand whatever you wanted? Chen's answer came without hesitation. Admiral, in the 50 years since first contact, the Galactic Council has faced exactly 0 extinction-level threats before today. You built a peaceful civilization based on cooperation, scientific advancement, and mutual understanding. That is an incredible achievement that we deeply respect. She stood and walked to the main display, which showed a map of Council space, hundreds of worlds where billions of beings lived in peace and prosperity. But we also understood that peaceful civilizations are vulnerable to threats that don't share their values. Someone needed to be ready for the day when diplomacy and reason weren't enough. Someone needed to maintain the capability to fight and win against enemies that only understood force. The room fell silent as the full weight of her words sank in. The humans hadn't just been hiding their military capabilities. They had been serving as silent guardians of galactic civilization, preparing for threats that the Council hoped would never come. Dr. Cassara broke the silence with a question that would reshape the future of the galaxy. What happens now? The Council knows about your true capabilities. The political balance of the galaxy has fundamentally changed. Admiral Chen activated another display, this one showing deployment patterns for human fleets across the galaxy. Doctor, the Treaty of Terra is already being drafted by our diplomatic corps and your Council representatives. The arrangement is simple. The Council continues to handle diplomacy, trade regulation, scientific advancement, and all the peaceful functions of galactic civilization. The display shifted to show human patrol routes and defensive positions. Humanity takes responsibility for military threats that exceed Council capabilities. We become the galaxy's immune system, quietly patrolling the dangerous regions, monitoring for threats, and responding with appropriate force when something tries to harm peaceful civilizations. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. The Council species could continue to build their peaceful utopia, while humanity handled the ugly necessity of violence. The arrangement would allow both civilizations to focus on what they did best. General Rivera joined the briefing, still wearing the scarred armor he had used during the ground assault on the Devourer nest. His presence added weight to Admiral Chen's words. Here was living proof of humanity's willingness to fight and die to protect others. The galaxy is safer now than it was a week ago, Rivera said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally eliminated an extinction threat. But there are other dangers out there. Other quarantine zones, other hostile species, other threats that we haven't discovered yet. The Council's peaceful approach works for managing civilization. Our approach works for defending it. Dr. Cassara looked around the room at the human officers, finally understanding what she was seeing. These weren't conquerors or destroyers. They were guardians who had spent 50 years preparing to sacrifice themselves for people they barely knew. They had hidden their true nature not out of deception, but out of respect for the peaceful galaxy the Council had built. Her final report to the Council would capture the new reality in simple terms. Humanity represents the most sophisticated military civilization in known galactic history. Their technology, tactics, and strategic thinking exceed our capabilities by several orders of magnitude. However, their actions demonstrate a commitment to protecting rather than conquering. They have voluntarily assumed the role of galactic defenders, asking nothing in return except the right to continue their mission. 6 months later, Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station Mark II, looking out at a galaxy that would never again mistake human restraint for human weakness. In the distance, human patrol fleets maintained their silent vigil, guardians forged in the crucible of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. The distress call had reached the Deathworlders, and they had responded not with aid, but with the promise that no civilization would ever face extinction alone again. The galaxy was in good hands, hands that had learned to be gentle through the hard-won knowledge of when to be absolutely ruthless.